Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for coming to spend some time with us today. Today, we're going to do a little bit of reimagining student research papers and presentations in Adobe Spark. Todd, thank you. I'm going to hand over to you if you're good with that.
Thank you, Melissa. My name is
Yeah.
Todd Taylor, and I have many titles. One of them is a pedagogical evangelist for Adobe. Here's a URL and a link to that URL, which will take you to my portfolio, which includes links to this webinar and the one I did last week, as well as lots of other resources that I'll be mentioning throughout the day. One of the resources that is linked here is a free OER online textbook called Adobe Creative Cloud Across the Curriculum, a guide for students and teachers. And it talks in more depth about doing the kind of teaching and pedagogy that I'll be promoting today. Today's presentation is about reimagining student research papers and projects and presentations in Adobe Spark. And so we'll be talking about what Adobe Spark is and how it works. But before we begin, we want to make sure that we are following the chief and cardinal rule of instructional technology, which is we want to be sure that the tail doesn't wag the dog. And what that means is, in 25 years of my experience as a university teacher and a pedagogical evangelist, when we introduce new technologies into the teaching space, whether it's face-to-face or virtual, increasingly, as of recently, we want to be sure that we don't get our priorities inverted. The classic mistake with instructional technology is to get so focused on the machines, on the hardware, on the software itself, we forget what we're doing and why we're there in the first place. And that is to transform the student experience, to make a rich kind of pedagogical experience that you can't get in other ways. And so I have a resource that is also available through that link that I showed you earlier called 10 Principles for Instructional Technology. I covered some of those in my last webinar, and I'm not going to repeat them. If you want to browse through them again, you can find that link here. But I do want to focus on 3 of those principles as we get quickly started here, which is we always want to keep people first. We want to use technology to bring people together. In this era of emergency remote teaching, we want to be sure that we're being especially kind and understanding to our students and ourselves if we find ourselves suddenly teaching and learning in an environment that's unfamiliar to us. We want to start simple, which is why we're using Adobe Spark today. It is the simplest application I can think of for use in academic settings. And we want to focus on learning outcomes and not the application itself. The tail wags the dog when we are more worried about the software than we are about learning outcomes. To give a complete spoiler for this webinar, if you take nothing away from it, if you were to literally just copy and paste this one sentence or these 2 sentences, one short paragraph, and use this in your own class or share it with a colleague, it's this simple. You could put this on your assignment prompt or in your syllabus, where you are saying to your students, in this assignment, you have the option to draft and submit your work as an Adobe Spark page instead of a traditional word processing document or a conventional presentation slide deck. It's that simple. You just give students the option. All you need to tell them is they can go to spark.adobe.com to get a free account, and then they can share the URL that they create from their Spark page in spark.adobe.com to get feedback or to submit their work to you. It's that simple. So you can skip to the end of this entire webinar if that's all you really need to hear. But it probably makes more sense to unpack how we got to that place. But it really is that straightforward. I've had a lot of success introducing instructional technologies not only to my own students, but to faculty with whom I consult by just showing them Adobe Spark and saying, give your students the option of doing a conventional research project, paper, presentation, either in Spark or through traditional means. And so to be consistent with where we started, we want to start out by pointing out that there are many paths to the same summit. What is the purpose? What are the fundamental learning outcomes or abilities that research papers and research presentations and research projects were supposed to do for students anywhere across the curriculum? I would argue that in the information age, there is more or less a 3-part essential skill that applies to any curriculum. And this is the heart of what we're doing when we assign research projects to students. It's students who have cultivated this skill or this ability are able to move with cognitive and intellectual agility between all kinds of circumstances in school and in a profession. And so that three-part skill begins with data or information, locating or generating the best data information. We live obviously in the information age. The problem isn't lack of data anymore. I tell my students, don't ever tell your professor you couldn't find any research on the given assignment, because the problem is that we don't have enough ideas or research or evidence. The problem is we can't find the best and the most relevant for this particular situation. And so locating or generating the best evidence is the first ability that students need to develop. Then, once they've collected their data set or their information, their bibliography, they need to analyze connections within that. And too often education has stopped at this point, where it's just about finding content and regurgitating or giving content back. When this really comes together and when this really becomes powerful is when, in the third part of this, they're asked to articulate a course of action in response to that analysis. So they locate the information, they analyze a pattern in that information, and then they communicate or articulate a perspective about what they found so that others can do something with that. And so to me, that is the summit. That's the way we're trying to get there, whether it's in a biology class or an English class or religious studies class. Doesn't matter if they're first year students or graduate students, they're all trying to develop these habits of mind and these intellectual and academic abilities that can transfer to other situations and locations. And so the specific outcomes or intellectual moves that would be on a syllabus, that would be a part of a research assignment, would be having students focus on their work on a main point or idea. Sometimes that's in the form of a thesis statement. Then they're always asked and often graded on the degree to which they structure their content logically and predictably. That would be organization. They're asked to use language appropriately for the particular context, tone, vocabulary, sentence length, sentence style. And then they're asked, and this is maybe what's most important and definitional, if you want to use that term, about academic work and assigning research projects and papers and presentations, is they're asked to integrate an evidence into their analysis and communication. And so that's the difference in many ways between academic modes of meaning making and other modes, maybe creative modes, right? It's that integration of evidence that's really the focus. And so the last piece is that they need to discuss the topic in an appropriate complexity, not too wide or not too narrow. They want to think about scope. And so the learning outcomes, they are the same whether you're teaching face-to-face, whether you're teaching asynchronously, whether you're teaching online, whether you're teaching in a synchronous environment. These are still the summit. This is still the point that we're trying to get students to. It's just now the means are going to adjust. And so in making choices about what you're going to do in your class, you want to think about the affordances and the limitations of whatever choices you're going to make. And so I'm going to introduce to you today Adobe Spark and the affordances that Adobe Spark offers educators around the world is that it is completely free. There's no subscription, there's no credit cards, there's nothing to spend or invest on. It's free to all. It is cloud-based. All of the assets, all of the work, all the projects that you and your students create in Spark sit up in the cloud, and that makes it very easy for people to move from device to device and access their materials. Also, Adobe Spark is device agnostic. That means it functions more or less the same on a mobile device, as a tablet, as a laptop, as a desktop computer. The experience is almost universal between all of those devices. And as many of you might have found out by now, that in this sudden crisis of having to teach in an emergency situation remotely, some students, the only access they have is a smartphone or a mobile device. And so it's very important that they're able to actually compose and do their work through those devices the same way that they can on a laptop. Now, obviously, it's a lot easier to type out something in detail on a laptop, and it's a lot easier to see a screen on a laptop. But at least you have the possibility of accessibility and equal access because of the way Spark is engineered to be not just device agnostic, but platform agnostic. And that means it's the same on Windows as in PC. Spark is designed to enable student multimodal work. There are lots of different approaches to word processing and creating those kinds of documents. And so the reason to use Spark is if you wanted to try something different. If you wanted students to be able to easily compose a visual narrative alongside a textual narrative for moments when that would be appropriate. And maybe the best selling point in terms of your students picking up Adobe Spark to help work on their research projects is that it has essentially no learning curve. And we'll see that as we start to move right over into Adobe Spark right now. Basically, to operate Adobe Spark, you click the plus button and you follow the instructions that it gives you. And so right here, I'm going to click on Create a Project, and I get all these different options: flyer, Instagram post, Facebook cover, collage. Excuse me. Today, we're going to talk about using something called Spark Page to make web pages. These are microsites that exist up on the internet. And my connection's a little slow today, so it's spinning. And what this is a very, very simple and easy way for anyone to create a web page in a matter of minutes. And it's very simple. There's a plus button that you click on, and so the interface is more or less intuitive. If you want to add a title, you just click on the title, and we're going to add a title. And I don't know if this is going to work, but we're going to give it a try. Would someone out there, well, everyone out there, if you would please post a question in the chat pod. Actually, post this. I'd like you to suggest the title of an actual research project that maybe you're assigning your students. And we're going to try to build a sort of a mock research paper based upon those suggestions if they come through quickly. And while you're taking a minute to type that up, I'm going to switch over to another Spark page. And again, this resource is available through my home page, which is over here, and I showed you earlier. If you scroll down, this is the one that actually has this green guy crossing a street right here. And what this is this is an assignment prompt for assigning this kind of multimodal work. Melissa, did anyone suggest a topic or a title for a research project?
We don't have anything yet.
Okay, I'll just go ahead and I'll wing it myself. What this assignment prompt outline does is it helps you think about the necessary things you want to consider when putting together an assignment prompt for this kind of work. And as I suggested earlier, it actually doesn't even need to be so complicated as redesigning an assignment prompt. Because of this work, you could just say anywhere in your normal assignment prompt, instead of doing the research paper in a word processor, you can go to Spark and do this. And so I have a quick sample of a research paper that I just found on the internet that was apparently made for public consumption. And so it's a color psychology paper. And I want you to look at the screen right now and imagine that you're the student and you followed this piece of advice. You've gone to spark.adobe.com, you've created your own Spark page account, and now you're going to do this color research paper here instead of doing it in a word processor. So in order to add a title, what would you do? We just click here, and then we start typing color, what was the name of it? Color psychology paper. Color psychology paper. And we'll pretend that this is psychology. It's definitely a sophomore level course, 222. All right, there you go. And we'll say that this is spring 2020. What's missing here clearly is that it needs some color. It needs some graphics. It needs some photographs. Compare this, what we're about to do, with this research paper, which is about color theory. Eventually, it goes to a survey about different emotions, about color theory. But isn't it kind of ironic that this whole thing is about color, and yet it's colorless? It's black and white. There's a kind of tension there in talking about the effectiveness and the way color works when there is no color. And so if we wanted to add anything to a Spark page, we look for a plus button, we click the button, click on photo. We can upload photos if we want. We can search Adobe Stock for photos to be licensed, or we click on find free photos, and we have public domain, fair use photos that are free to use. And these are all high resolution, high quality images. And now compare the experience of someone consulting this research paper with this one. Now, this isn't essentially better just because it has pretty pictures, but it is opening up the possibility that there's more bandwidth with which someone can create. And so this begins with an outline. If you think of it this way, there's a research question, there's a review of literature, there's analysis and methodology. And so if I want to add an outline to this, I click on the text button, I type in the different parts, research question, and I'm going to format that a little so it kind of stands out. Research question, review of literature, analysis, review of literature. And I'm going to format that as well. And look how easy and intuitive all of this is. I just click the plus button. I do what comes next. And I really don't need, obviously, to learn any coding or anything complicated technologically. I just follow along. And so we'll pretend that I've gone ahead and I've done all the different segments for this. And I'm just gonna, for the sake of time, I'm gonna quickly cut and paste back and forth, which at first is something people have done when they've moved from conventional sort of how did I mess this up? Conventional sort of work to doing things online, and they at first they just sort of cut and paste from one thing to another. And this, and so I'm going to suggest that it's maybe better to actually begin your composing actually here instead of going into a word processing document and then cutting back and forth like I actually am. But in the interest of time, I'm going to do that today. So I quickly started cutting back and forth, and immediately we start to see that, it starts to look like a conventional word processing document. But if we're going to read this, it's arguing that color may seem simple and unimportant, but it really has a profound effect on our daily lives. Color does affect mood, okay? And so wouldn't it be compelling if I could have a visual narrative or an image that somehow reflects exactly what that suggestion is? So instead of color now, I'm going to type on the word mood and see what comes up. And isn't it interesting that, in this mood here, in these pictures here about mood, color is playing a pretty significant role. I mean, if I pick this right here, it's kind of dark and somber, and it's sort of conveying a sort of pensive mood, right? Let's say maybe I don't like that idea. Maybe the paragraph is talking about a more elated kind of mood, and I'm going to look for a photograph that kind of conveys that idea. This one up here at the beginning, she seems really happy. These are bright colors. These are pastel colors, and obviously her facial expression is conveying something, but it's a very different kind of experience from the other one. And I'm going to format this as a window. And so now you can see that this project is starting to come alive. In fact, if we look back at the title, it doesn't make sense to call this a paper anymore. So what it really is color psychology research project. And this is something that is really interesting. When we think back about where we began today, we talked about how there are many paths to the same summit. We may be getting to the same destination in terms of the intellectual moves and the kind of abilities that our students are developing. But once we go into these other modalities, it might start to look a little bit differently. And that's a good thing, probably, in terms of the variety of perspective that we want to promote. And so this gives a different perspective on not just what you're trying to say, in this case about color, but also about the way you make meaning and share ideas. Okay, and so let's imagine we've gone ahead and we've formatted all this. In fact, if I wanted to, I could go out to YouTube and I could type in something about color theory. And let's see, there's a basic link on color theory. Then I'm going to stop before it starts playing because I don't want to listen to it. I'm going to copy that URL from YouTube. And then I'm going to go over here. And if I wanted to add a video to this research project page, ask yourself, what would you do? You would click the plus button. Then what would you do? I'd click on the word video. Now I'm going to paste that URL down, and I'm going to save that URL. And now I've integrated that video clip very easily, very seamlessly into this project and into this page. Imagine we've edited all this. We've maybe changed the theme and the font. We've got it exactly the way we want to do it. Now we're ready to share it. So I'm going to click on the share button. And then I'm going to click on publish and share the link. And then I always have to pick a category. I'm going to click on education. You can toggle off some meta tags that are going to identify you or not. In this case, I'm going to encourage my students to be private about their work that's being drafted for the moment. Then I'm going to click on create link. And it's important you know that this is a public link. This is a public URL. This work is out there, and anyone who knows really what they're doing could find this if they wanted to. But it's hard to do that unless you're really looking for it. So I've copied the link, and now all I have to do is paste that link into an LMS assignment, into an email, into anything. I can also quite easily paste it into a social media link as well. Now that URL lives kind of permanently. Let's say I go back in here and I change this paragraph and I add another paragraph here. Now all I have to do is go back to the share button, click on publish and share link. And now instead of creating a new link, all I have to do is update that link. And so then anyone who has that link now, and I'm going to go over to a new browser window. I'm going to paste that. Oops, I'm going to undo that. I'm going to copy this link. I'm going to paste that link down here. And this is what anyone who's viewing this web page can see. If you were to open that URL on a smartphone, this page would respond. That is, it would adjust. And I'm going to make this really small to kind of show you how this works. Look how this adjusts on the fly to whatever the size of the screen is. That means that Adobe Spark page is responsive. And this is incredibly important in terms of having to format or create something once and then having it automatically adjust to whatever screen it's being viewed on. This, of course, at this moment, when so many people are suddenly in academic settings, accessing their material and their educational content on small devices, on smartphones, the ability to compose for all screens simultaneously is extremely important. It's extremely important the ease of which to do this in terms of being sure that we're not allowing the tail to wag the dog. We're not focusing on coding. We're not focusing on sophisticated sort of web building skills. All we had to do was click plus buttons to create something very elegant, very professional looking, and enabling the student and the faculty member to focus on the content and the substance of what they're doing and not the technology itself. And so what we have here now is the ability with this incredibly integrated search engine that enables students and anyone who's building in Adobe Spark page to put a high quality, high resolution, fair use images into a text in a way that also, and this is very important, embeds a credit at the end. Now, this is not obviously APA format, but it's enough so that you can find the image and make sure that students are being aware of issues of fair use, copyright, and citation as a way to get them started focusing on those elements as an essential part of integrating evidence and sources into their writing. Okay, so what else? The other thing we have here is because of that search engine possibility, we have students being able for the first time very often to be able to compose a really powerful visual narrative that complements the textual narrative so that they're learning to talk in the modalities that are transforming our cultures and economies right now, where there are times that you want to be heavy in text and you want to be text driven. But if you're going to write a paper on color and color theory, doesn't it make sense to try to talk about color to some extent? And so this is another possibility. This is not to say that traditional modes of writing research papers and projects are all wrong. Not. They're very important in their own modality. It's about picking, it's about making the right choice. It's about thinking again about the affordances and limitations of the choices that we're making as faculty members and students are making in the work they produce, thinking about what is enabled and what maybe is eliminated by making choices such as creating a multimodal project instead of a purely text-based one. Now you notice that my vocabulary shifted from the opening. In the beginning, we started talking about papers because that was the modality that most people were most comfortable with and most familiar with. It's certainly what I learned and the only thing I learned pretty much when I was a student. Now these things start to kind of blur lines between modalities. One of the second most popular modality for presenting research in academic settings for students is an oral presentation. And so Adobe Spark page is actually wonderful as a kind of scrolling slide deck. So imagine what I did here where I started out with just the sort of outline and maybe one sentence or one graphic that talks about each different piece of this research project. Now I'm going back in here and I'm deleting all the text because if I were going to give an oral presentation, I wouldn't want people to read, detailed text. I would have key terms. I would have key, ideas highlighted. But if I were to then take this outline and give a verbal presentation about my research, I could have this scrolling in the background behind me if I were live and had a projector over my shoulder, where I would say, well, the research question is this, and I would define the research question. And I would summarize the review of literature this way. And ideally, I would have an image or something that would prompt a conversation or an aspect of what I was relaying linguistically and verbally. And so you can think about phases or drafts of the development of a research project. In this way, In some ways, a first draft of a research project could just be an outline that's narrated. And then you add some pieces, small pieces to that, and that becomes an oral presentation. And then you take that and you add full text to that, and that becomes a full research project. And so one way of thinking about doing this asynchronously, because we're mostly thinking about doing this live, is if a student were to use a screen capturing program, and I just tend to often use Adobe QuickTime. So I'm not sure if this will work in terms of what you're seeing out there, but I've just turned on QuickTime Player. And whether or not this really works or not, in terms of what you're able to see, I've gone into QuickTime Player and I've done now new screen recording. I've turned on that screen recording. I'm going to click to start, and it's asking me just to start the recording. And so literally what is being recorded right now is my voice into this computer at the same time that we are seeing what I am controlling on screen. So if I wanted to do a virtual or an asynchronous virtual sort of presentation, I could put together this Spark page, and then I could use it as the slide deck that I just narrate as I'm going through it. I could say, hi, my name is Todd Taylor. This is my semester project for a color psychology research project in Psych 222, spring 2020. My research question was this. My review of the literature showed that. I'd like to give you this particular example from the review of literature, talking about the influence of pastel colors. If we listen to what this important theorist says about color in this video clip, we can hear what she is talking about. I then did a survey and did an analysis, and this is what I found. And then we stopped the recording, and then I've got a QuickTime file that captures all that, and then I could share through YouTube or whatever means that you have for doing so. And so that's a way to, this is a way to have a kind of live oral presentation that happens at a distance, that happens remotely. Either way, you can see that this is a different kind of experience than your typical slide deck. We want to kind of wrap up today by coming back to this idea of affordances and limitations. Now, there are lots of ways to do what I just did in terms of not just a multimodal research paper project, but also a multimodal slide deck. There are lots of different applications to use, some of which allow you to embed audio into your slides, and you could do that way. My experience has been, though, that those applications tend to be frustrating for someone who's really working mostly, in this particular case, to talk about psychology and color. And now I've got to spend often a half an hour, 45 minutes, just trying to figure out how to get that audio to embed sort of seamlessly. Whereas this was very simple. Creating this Adobe Spark page as a slide presentation was very easy to generate. And then if you are at all familiar with screen capture, that was very easy to do. Probably the hardest part about that is going to be sharing a large file with lots of media embedded into it. It takes up lots of memory across a slow connection. And so if we, as we're kind of wrapping up here, we come back to our starting point. We don't want the tail to wag the dog. We want to be sure we're focusing on learning outcomes, and that is to help students develop research skills that are more than just something you would do for school, but something that would transfer to any situation. And then we want to leverage these technologies to take advantage of the opportunities we have to promote those learning outcomes. And so if you think about the essential outcomes or intellectual moves that we ask students to do in a research project, whether it's presented on paper or in a Spark page or in a slide deck or an oral presentation or in a recorded presentation, they come back to these same moves. We want them to focus on main points or thesis. And look how formatting text in this color theory, page does that. It tends to draw not just their eye, but their cognitive attention to exactly that kind of point. And so we want them to structure content logically and predictably. And so you're forced in many ways to think in very sort of modular structures when you are confined to this vertical scrolling architecture. And there's a reason why you can't scroll left and right and you can't have a different experience. And that's because Adobe Spark Page is meant to be responsive so that you can operate it just the same on a small mobile device screen as you can on any other device screen. Also, by limiting those choices, you make it so that the learning curve is flatter for people to figure this out. If they had lots of different options, it's much more easy to get lost and disoriented. And so I've had actually a lot of success with students starting to really kind of visualize what it means to structure a paper, not just in terms of 5 paragraphs, an intro, conclusion, and your hamburger essay or thesis driven work, but to really understand that, this paragraph here beneath this image needs to be responding to that image. That whatever follows this particular video clip needs to be in concrete dialogue with whatever came before it. And so not only we then getting them to think about logical structure and a predictable structure that it makes it cognitively easy to understand what they're saying, it also is a structure that starts to help with the learning outcome of integrating evidence into your analysis and communication. And so the example that I just gave right here is something that I've discovered in developmental writing classes in particular, where students are writing in Adobe Spark Page for the first time after spending most of their lives only writing in word processors, is that the quality of the integration of the evidence becomes much more concrete and precise when they can see that they are responding textually to some kind of visual piece of evidence or clue or cue, right? And so we are now marching pretty effectively towards these learning outcomes. Another thing that I've discovered is that because there is this share button in Adobe Spark Page, when I ask students, particularly students who are developmental, who might be on the academic margins, who might be struggling, feeling like college or university is a place for them, the consistent experience that they've told me they're having is that this seems familiar and inviting to them, this format. Not just because it's colorful and entertaining, so to speak, um, but because it seems like their work was actually meant to share. There's something about something that's only word processed that feels like you're trying to appeal to authority. You're trying to convince a teacher that you've done your work or that you're a good student, whereas this feels like something that's meant to be shared and circulated. You're trying to do something that writes to and connects with a real or broader audience other than just a single sort of authority as a teacher, as an instructor. And so we're marching again along with um, with these learning outcomes because Spark Page automatically embeds credits at the end of it. We're now going to have a conversation about bibliography. We're now going to have a conversation about fair use and copyright. And what I found is that when students know that there is an actual destination, there's a real audience, there's someone other than just a kind of pedantic teacher looking at their work, their bibliographies improve dramatically because now their reputation is at stake with something more than just that of authority. They care about, and they're much more deeply engaged with their work, and so they care about getting it right and enabling others to do what they've done, which is to integrate evidence and ideas from other good sources into their work. And so here we have comprehensive ways of pushing forward this learning outcome of integrating evidence and analysis and communication in your work when thinking about doing and assigning this kind of Adobe Spark research page. As always, there's using language that's appropriate for context, using the right diction, being sure that you have formatted and edited your writing as carefully as you can. And what I find again is that it's this share button in Adobe Spark page that creates this kind of engagement where students care a lot more than typical conventional formats about making the language right and thinking about how audience is going to respond to this, and therefore thinking about what's appropriate for this particular context and this particular audience and situation. And then lastly, there's discussing scope. This is a potential limitation of doing this work. This is a scrolling format. It has a limitation. You're not going to want to put a 400,000 word document into something that only scrolls vertically, right? And so we can start thinking about adjusting scope, thinking about complexity, because we can visualize it in some ways. We can feel it kind of scrolling underneath our hands or underneath our fingers in this format. And at the end of the day, you may decide that because of that reason, in this particular context, a particular assignment isn't right for Adobe Spark page. But what I have found is, like this door that's open on one side and this door that's closed on another, having this different kind of experience, this different kind of perspective and position with doing conventional academic work in a different modality enables students to start thinking critically and reflecting on exactly these kinds of issues and questions about, how best to create a thesis, how best to organize this particular work, what is the appropriate style for this context, how can I become better and more effective at developing my ability to do research, and then also to think about the scope of what I'm trying to claim and what I'm trying to put together. And so that's a quick overview of my thinking and my approach to the one sentence that I told you was the end of this. If this sounds at all attractive to you, or it seems like it might have some possibilities, even if it seems like it's a possibility, maybe not even for all of your students, just give them the option of trying this. Say, go to spark.adobe.com, sign up, get your free account, and you have the option. It's completely up to you whether you want to turn in this particular assignment on a word processing document, or if it's a live presentation as a slide deck, or do this in Spark page, and then compare the experiences that you have as a faculty member and the results you get between the two different modalities. And ask your students to think critically and reflect purposefully on their experience between the two different modalities. And then before you open that door and give them that option, predict, what percentage of your class is likely to choose the Spark page option as opposed to the conventional modality. And then what do you learn as a faculty member about your teaching and about the research process and about the transferable abilities and capacities that are the fundamental learning outcomes of designing or redesigning or reimagining an assignment in just that way. And so I encourage you to experiment, to try such explorations on your own. I myself have gotten to the point where I can't think without Adobe Spark. All of my lesson plans, in fact, obviously the presentation you just looked at itself was done in Adobe Spark. And in fact, my portfolio right now, which is exactly when I had to turn in my last annual report to the dean, I just sent her a link to this page, which is a collection of Spark pages that about everything that I've been doing for the last 2 years. And so thank you so much for listening to what we've been talking about today. Are there any questions, Melissa, that you've seen pop up? Anyone like to frame any questions for us before we log off and end this webinar today?
No questions in particular. I had a nice little discussion with one of our participants who said that they used to do a unsolved mystery project which I thought was pretty cool. So they had a list of mysteries, and students could either choose them or bring a mystery of their own. And I think that's pretty cool. That seems I'm one of those people who likes to listen to those mystery podcasts. So
Well, I've got a mystery for you. Why are MLA and APA formats different?
I that stuff gives me nightmares.
Why can't we just agree on one format? And it's actually that's a webinar for another time. The difference is they see the world differently. So if you think about MLA format, you're supposed to put the full title of the author up front, and you put the year last. That's the way the humanists look at knowledge and knowledge building and research and sharing. APA format, people who are empiricists, who tend to do more quantitative work, they abbreviate the name of the author and they put the year up front. Because in more scientific data, we want the author to be more objective. We don't want the author to have a personality. We don't really care what their name is. We care more about how recently they said what they said. Whereas in the humanities, there's the impression that whatever people said 400 years ago, if it's still being quoted today, it probably is as relevant as ever. And therefore, we care a lot about the name of the person who said the thing. We don't care so much about when they said it. And so I give that sort of odd example of why those differences, why that particular mystery exists, as to illustrate also what can happen when you see student production of research work from different perspectives based upon the format with which they're sharing their work. If it is this inside of this container, which is in danger of being calcified and rusted and hard for students to really wrap their head around and see through because it's been something that's just been given to them without a real understanding of how it works, then you're probably going to be less successful in delivering those fundamental learning outcomes. Whereas experimenting with something dynamic and new and different, like a multimodal presentation of the same work with the same intellectual depth, that can unlock these possibilities because, like the difference between the way the humanists see the world and scientists see the world, someone who's communicating in a space of digital transformation is going to have a different epistemological experience than someone who's doing things in a paper-based modality that maybe made more sense 20 or 30 years ago. So there's that quick lecture. As we're coming up to the last minute of the session, any other last thoughts or questions that we've identified out there?
Nothing so far. So yeah, but thank you for that. That's actually that's helpful to me.
Thank you for everyone for tuning in today. And for those of you who will be watching the recast of this, I am doing a webinar every Tuesday on different issues, specifically thinking about all of my colleagues out there who are teachers who are suddenly finding themselves having to do remote distance teaching. And as you can see, I'm trying to make those experiences at a distance as accessible and potentially transformative and dynamic as possible for as many students as we can reach. And that's why Spark Page is such an amazing possibility because it's so free, it's so open, it's so easy to use, it's so easy to share ideas, and it's so engaging. And at the same time, students are developing the kind of fundamental literacies, including digital literacies, that they need to be successful in our cultures and economies today, which are increasingly being conducted at a distance, remotely, and certainly digitally. So thanks again. This is Todd Taylor signing off. Until next Tuesday. Thanks for showing up today.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Todd. We will see everyone next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Hi everyone, thanks for watching. Click the link in the description below to explore more free online professional development and click the link on screen to subscribe to the channel for more videos.